Hi, mining community. Welcome back to another episode of the Dig Deep, the mining podcast, a show that brings you latest insights, thought leadership, and stories from across the global mining industry. In today's episode, we have Andrew Thake, who's the director of Beacon Events, one of the leading mining-focused events and conference businesses operating across the world. During this conversation, we're going to explore the important role mining conferences and industry events play in connecting investors, miners, governments, and the wider supply chain across the sector. Andrew's also going to share his insights to his own journey within the mining industry, how he developed his knowledge and network within the industry, and some of the influential books, personalities, and conversations that's helped him shape his understanding of the sector. We're also going to discuss some of the major trends currently impacting mining globally, including the growing influence of government policy, critical mineral strategies, supply chain security, and the increased importance of downstream and midstream processing. In addition, Andrew's going to give us his perspective on the evolving role of Asian financial centres, such as Hong Kong and Singapore, within the global mining finance. The commodities attracting the most market attention today, and lessons he's learned around the mining investment from some of the industry's most respected investors. So with no further ado, Andrew, great to have you on the podcast. How are you?
Delighted to go and meet you, Rob, and delighted to be talking today from Singapore.
Yep, I was just going to say that you've moved over to Singapore now, and obviously coping with the heat. And actually, as the recording of here in the UK, we're actually going through a bit of a heat wave here, which is about 30 degrees. But anyway, less of that. Most of our audience will know you. But for those odd few that may not know you, you may have not spoken to before, I just wonder if you just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your career, how you got into the events industry and obviously the mining industry, and how you've sort of your career's progressed to what it is today.
Yeah, so I've been working for Beacon Events since 2014, and then before that, I was an events organizer. To be honest with you, Rob, I fell into events organizing by accident. I did a joint honours degree in modern history and management studies. And for some reason, I can't quite explain, I decided I'd make a very good chartered accountant. So I went and joined KPMG, and KPMG soon had the good sense to realise that I'd make an absolutely terrible chartered accountant. So basically, I got sort of like fired from the job after about a year or so. And then by hook or crook, I just kind of stumbled into the sort of business of event organizing after a couple of years. And, I've always kind of enjoyed it because it obviously gets to talk to like a wide variety of people and work in a wide variety of sectors. And then in 2014, I was hired by Beacon Events, whilst actually being based in Singapore, to go to Hong Kong and to go and work on then their Hong Kong show. So for those people who aren't familiar with Beacon Events, we're just very, very passionate about the mining industry. We just do 4 of the world's largest mining events. Our event up in Hong Kong that actually just run. We also organise Resource in Tomorrow London that I oversee in the first week of December. We also have IMARC, International Mining Resources Conference, that takes place in Sydney at the end of October. And last but by no means least, we also are involved in the organisation of the Future Minerals Forum that takes place in Riyadh. So that's kind of how I kind of got into the industry by sort of like accident. But having found myself in the mining industry, I absolutely love it.
Great. I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about the role that you actually play within Beacon and within the mining industry.
Yeah, so for all of our events we always like to spend a lot of our time researching the event, making sure that our event is most up to date in terms of content, and making sure that our events very, very much sort of differ in terms of content and perspectives around the world. So to take a very obvious example, for our show that ran very recently in Hong Kong, would have had quite a strong sort of Chinese influence, a lot of Chinese mining companies speaking. For our event in London, had a very, very sort of different sort of feel and vibe, with a lot more involvement from the US government, Western perspectives, how we can go and build independent supply chains. So during the course of the year, I probably have about 300 conversations, a bit like how I'm sort of talking to you today, Rob. And from those 300 conversations, just along with background research, I'll help to go and put together the actual conference program. I then spend a large amount of my time talking to mining CEOs, talking to large institutional investors, key kind of consultancies, industry players, also governments as well that we'll probably come on to like later, trying to convince them to go and participate as speakers to the event or to go and attend the event. But say a lot of my job is just talking to people, whether it's on the phone, whether it's via Teams calls or face to face, just to really ensure that our programs are really up to date and they really kind of reflect what's kind of currently driving the mining industry.
Um, Obviously, Beacon Events has built a strong reputation in mining-focused conferences and events, as you've alluded to. Why do you believe the mining industry places such importance on obviously these kinds of events, and what purpose do they ultimately serve?
Yeah, so I think the purpose that the events and that hopefully like our events really sort of serve is probably a couple of objectives. Is obviously there's always a business perspective to those events, especially when we have our sponsors coming along, whether they're miners, whether they're service providers, they're looking for ROI. So we are looking to sort of set up business meetings with them, with mining companies, with institutional investors, obviously service providers with mining companies, in order that they can kind of leave the event with obviously valuable new business connections that they would go and end up sort of like doing deals with. But I think also as well, we also want to have a really kind of strong educational platform as well, and try to, it's sort of a cliche term, but give the audience content that they can't go and Google, go and give them insights that you kind of can't get from sort of like looking at sort of chat GPT. And I think there's also a real thing, and I think COVID really proved this. Online events are great, but there's a real power in meeting people face to face. And I think that that's something that COVID proved that the events business can really go and deliver. So we really focus on making sure we get the right people in the room as well.
Obviously, I've been to a few of your events and highly recommend them. But if someone listening hasn't been to one of your events, what would they expect by attending? And maybe I know, obviously, one of the themes around going to conferences is networking. So I just wonder if you can give also any tips on networking.
Yeah, so I mean, our events are typically sort of like 2 to 3 days long. With regards to the sort of like networking, I guess we try to have lots of sort of standard sort of structured networking that you'd see at any events, sort of like networking breaks. We'll also have sort of like themes for lunches. We always have like gala dinners and awards as well. But a couple of things that we have, which may be a little bit different to maybe other events organizers, we at all of events we have a very very strong meeting planner application, which is essentially like a dating application where you can go and input in as to who you're looking to meet, and then it can hopefully then sort of match you up with potential clients. Something which we're doing on the content side both last year and increasingly more this year as well, we found that one of the challenges we were having with all of our events is that in the main plenary session is people are often a little bit afraid to contribute and ask questions, because in the plenary session we go and have everyone along and members of the press along as well. So we sometimes found that some of the members of our audience were a little bit sort of nervous about participating. So we've introduced at all our events these leadership roundtables, which are either under Chatham House rule, B, they're 90 minutes long. They're also on sensitive sort of topic areas. So they might be about, the opportunities for Ukraine, and the mining sector in like a post-war scenario. There might be on things like defense, critical raw materials. But the advantage of having discussions on the Chatham House rule is it means that people can participate as an individual and an expert, and they also are not afraid of being like quoted. So in areas such as defense, critical raw materials, there's probably a lot of defense primes out there who probably feel very nervous about commenting in a sort of a public environment, because it might show, or they might be afraid to show, a lack of knowledge about the area. But obviously in a Chatham House environment, in a safe space, they can ask questions and nobody's going to point fingers at them going, oh, such and such a defense prime doesn't know this and doesn't know that.
Mhm.
So we try to have sort of all different types of networking at our event. And, I think if somebody who's coming along to one of our events, if they don't kind of emerge from the event with at least 50 to 100 business cards, I would personally feel that we've probably let them down.
As you mentioned, obviously in your introduction, you're not from a traditional mining background, but although you have developed a strong understanding of the sector over the years, where has that knowledge come from, and what aspects of the mining industry have stood out to be obviously stood out most to you personally?
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple of things. I think, first of all, I think it should be sort of said as to how open the mining industry is about sharing information. So before I joined Beacon Events and I was organizing events in other sectors, it was often very hard to get hold of a CEO, to get a CEO's time on the phone to talk about their particular perspectives and insights. What's great about the mining industry is how open everyone is, how much everyone wants to go and share information, and how passionate people feel about the mining industry and feel about its importance towards the energy transition and I guess towards sort of like tomorrow's future. So I think when you can pick up the phone, it's often very easy to get an appointment with somebody, very easy to go and get them to go and talk to you. And I think that that can't be emphasized enough. Having said that is, I found that when I joined the mining industry, I needed to sort of, back those conversations by getting like a base knowledge. So there were obviously a number of like classic mining books that I sort of read. So I think it's the Northern Miner. I've got the Mining Explained, which is a great sort of like guide for somebody who's kind of knows like a little bit, but doesn't know a lot about mining. So that gives you the very good sort of basics. And then there's a number of great books sort of like out there that I encourage your like listeners to read. I really loved Vault Rush by Henry Sanderson. I think that gives a quite a good sort of like UK sort of perspective on the current critical minerals industry. There's also Rare Earths War, which is very much like a French perspective. The War Down Below by Ernest Schneider, who's an excellent journalist who works with like Reuters. Again, that's more slightly like American perspective. But then you can also read some really like, interesting sort of like stories from like many sort of like years ago. So I loved reading The Big Score, which for those readers who haven't read it, is a story of like Voisey Bay and I guess the rise of Robert Friedland and how he makes his first sort of like big score and how he plays everyone off against each other and sort of like comes out the winner at the end. And it's a truly marvelous book. And then also the other book I love as well is Briek's The Inside Story. And, again, for those readers that don't, I think I'm going to say Briek's was 1989. Rob, you may have to go and correct me if I've got the year wrong. But a very, very infamous mining sort of scandal involving a very, very dubious mining company called Briek's, which falsified its sort of like mining assay results. And when they were found out, obviously sort of like chaos chaos ensued, and their CEO either killed himself or allegedly killed himself. But the story is kind of like stranger than fiction. It was made into a really terrible film starring Matthew McConaughey. Don't go and watch the film. As much as I'm a Matthew McConaughey fan, it's probably his worst film, but the book is absolutely brilliant. And what was really good about reading the book is then a few years later, I got to meet some of the people mentioned in the book, people like Warren Owen, who now works for Rosso Asset Management, who was one of the people that first sort of like got wind that sort of something was amiss. And then also Dale Hendricks, who's a very famous geologist who's now very, very sadly like passed away. And many years ago, I think we actually had a panel in one of our events in Toronto. We brought together Warren and brought together Dale. It was the first time they'd gone and met for like 20 years. And it was really fascinating seeing what lessons had been learned from Briek's and what lessons hadn't. So I would encourage people to kind of like dive into those sort of like mining books because they really are fascinating, both from giving you a current insights into mining, but also giving you a really good historical sort of like perspective as well.
And I suppose carrying on from that with more obviously up to date, or not necessarily up to date media, podcast, obviously like this one,
Yours, yes.
and obviously journals, but other podcasts out there as well. Do you listen to any apart from books? Do you listen to any other media? Obviously, LinkedIn content as well. I think there's a lot of content that goes through LinkedIn. Is there other media that you use?
Yeah, so I do listen to your podcast, Rob, and then there are certain authors that I go and sort of like, I don't know, that I go and follow. primarily via like LinkedIn. I find there's like a lot of good sort of like people kind of drop articles via sort of like Substacks. So there's I know I like reading like Amanda Van Dyke's works. She's kind of come out with a book called The Critical Minerals Imperative. Though he's Australian, he gives a very good global perspective. There's a very good writer come investor called Scott North. I think he's really like excellent as well. I probably don't go on X as much as I should, but I think it's as a case of one's only got 24 hours in a sort of like in a day, so one has to be quite sort of selective like out there. So I'm sure I've probably missed a number of like great like podcast sort of like people, and some really good sort of like writers. So if you can go and suggest any, Rob, then please like let me know.
I certainly will do. You've spent obviously significant time, as you mentioned, speaking with obviously many mining executives,
Mm,
investors, and
mm.
governments globally. What major trends are you seeing emerge across the mining sector this year?
Yeah, so I guess the sort of like taking a couple of ones, and some may be obvious and some maybe like not so obvious. I guess the first one is it's not just a this year trend, it's probably been going on for a number of years. It's just the increasing importance of governments when it comes to mining policy, when it comes to critical minerals. I was inadvertently giving an interview a couple of weeks ago, and I was suddenly like, maybe a few years ago, I just said, oh, we have, BHP speaking, we've got BlackRock speaking. And I was talking about the presence of all the governments we have coming along to our events. And I think thinking about it afterwards, the reason why I was talking about the governments just so much is now when I talk to our audience, whether it's institutional investors, whether it's mining companies, they really want to hear what governments are doing in terms of sort of like policy. And I guess particularly when it comes to, I guess, the US government this year, there's a lot of interest in all these various announcements, whether it's kind of like Project Volt, whether it's what's going to happen with regards to after the midterm elections. There's just a huge amount of interest in hearing as to what the US is doing as a sort of like a world leader in terms of mining investment. Um, I think also as well now there's, especially this year, especially after the events happening in sort of the Straits of Hormuz, there's obviously supply chain resilience is an even more hotter topic than it was previous years. And we keep on thinking that it doesn't become more a hot topic, that it was hot, obviously, due to COVID, then due to the Ukraine invasion by Russia. But it keeps on becoming accentuated every single year. And it makes us realize, directly and indirectly as to how important critical and resilient supply chains are. And I think also another aspect to really kind of bring out this year as well is the mining industry has been historically quite bad, both in terms of conferences, but also in general, at just the upstream talking to each other. I think we're now realizing to how important the midstream is, how important that processing piece is. That's something that China does very, very well. And one of my concerns is the West is very good at talking a good game and bringing out some really good policy documents. But in terms of on that execution of like policy and making sure that we get the midstream sort of sorted out and making sure that they're part of the solution, and also have the downstream sort of like, as part of the solution as well. If you look at someone like China, whatever one may think about China, it has a 50-year plan and it executes it really, really well. And I think that the West is now realizing that we need to have that more like long-term sort of like planning. And hopefully we are now starting to go and see things sort of like change. But I guess we'll have to sort of wait a couple of years from now to see if some of these, initiatives we're seeing, whether it's either from Europe or from the United States, go and stay once the administration changes in a number of years' time.
This episode is sponsored by Mining International. In today's market, finding the right mining talent isn't easy. Mining International works closely with mining companies to identify and secure senior and technical professionals through a tailored search approach. If you're hiring or exploring your options, you can contact Rob Tyson via the show notes to start a conversation today.
I guess we can all see governments becoming far more involved in obviously critical minerals and obviously supply chains and resource security globally. But how do you see that changing the mining landscape, particularly when comparing Western markets with Asia and obviously also China?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of I think that maybe sort of directly leads to the challenge that I think the West has been facing as to whether it can actually go and develop independent supply chains. You know, with my sort of like West hat on, is we've had a number of goes of it, and for some reason, and for various reasons, it's gone and failed. So in the UK, we had British Volt. In Europe, we had like North Volt, and I think we have these number of initiatives, and it just seems to go for a couple of years, and then it like falls apart. I think that what might be different this time around is the US government involvement. And I think the amount of money that they're actually like investing. I think that that's one significant factor. I think the other factor as well, bringing in our Future Minerals Forum conference, is that the Saudis are now becoming a significant player as well. And they're also investing a lot of money into the space as well. So I feel that those two countries and their kind of entry into the mining market is what I think is going to change and make things different than, say, if we'd had this conversation 10 years ago in 2016. There is still, certainly with me being based out in when I'm in Singapore, and I talk to people here in Singapore, and of course also up in Hong Kong, where I've been to a few times this year, the feeling is very, very much different, that we have to work with China, that there's almost an inevitability about like working with sort of China. So I think there is a bit of a, I don't know if cynicism is a sort of fair word, maybe skepticism about whether the West can really succeed in terms of building independent supply chains. And out here in Singapore and Hong Kong, we feel we need to work with kind of China, because they are often going to be, key players in it when it comes to midstream and downstream, and you can't leave them totally out of the conversation.
And obviously, as you mentioned, you're based in Asia now, in Singapore. From your perspective, what role does Hong Kong and Singapore play today, obviously in terms of mining finance and investor hub, and how are they evolving as mining jurisdictions and mining financiers as a hub?
Yeah. So I guess giving a couple of top line statistics at the outset. So Hong Kong is the world's third largest financial center. New York's number one, and London's number two. Singapore is the fourth largest financial center. And then also, if you take in the top 10 financial centers globally, 6 of them are Asian. So you'd also add in Shenzhen, Seoul, Tokyo. And I've like missed the sixth. I think it's like Shanghai. I think. So I think that first of all, the point is to make it as to how strong the Asian economies are. With regards to Hong Kong in particular, not only is Hong Kong the third largest financial center, is according to which statistics you follow, it's due to surpass the UK. So it surpass London, become number two. It's also the second largest center in terms of ultra high net worths. So you see a lot of Chinese park their money into Hong Kong, which is then used to go and invest. And you see a number of consequences of that, of which one of them is that the Hong Kong exchange has done very, very well in terms of listings over the course of the last few years. Over the course of the last year, we've had Zijin, who've actually gone and like listed in Hong Kong. Also, CATL, the Chinese battery manufacturer, and the Hong Kong exchange has, in terms of the listing market, has never been so sort of like vibrant. So it's now even trying to sort of reach out to other like jurisdictions such as Australia, encouraging miners there to go and list in like Hong Kong. So it's a very, very rich environment. And I think that one thing the West sometimes gets wrong about Hong Kong is a lot of Westerners I've spoken to haven't been to Hong Kong since COVID. So they kind of like just know sort of like 10 people from Hong Kong and 6 some other sort of mates who may have left during COVID and haven't come back. And from that, they've formed that perception that Hong Kong is like dead. It's not. I've been there 4 times this year. It's incredibly like kind of like vibrant. There might be slightly less of Western kind of like expats, but they're being replaced by sort of like, Japanese, Korean, mainland sort of like mainland Chinese. A lot of also banks I've seen sort of like come back to Hong Kong and use it as being their sort of like main mining finance hub. As far as not just China, but as far as Asia is concerned as well. With regards to Singapore, it's a little bit sort of like different. Singapore is the fourth, largest global financial center, in the world. But I think that, but I think there's probably like less appetite for mining finance. It's got a bit more of a reputation as a trading hub and a commodities trading hub, and it has. Certainly over the course of the last 10 years, build up its expertise as an iron ore futures trading hub as well. So I think that that's due to like a lot of the good work that the Singapore Exchange here has done. So it's a very, very much sort of like a slightly sort of like different feel. I think there's also something culturally to be said as well, that when it comes to Singaporeans, by their innate nature, they're very, very a bit more sort of like conservative. So they're much more likely to, I think, to invest into real estate or to invest into an ETF. While I don't want to say that sort of people based in Hong Kong are more willing to take risks and more gambling orientated. And I don't want it to come across as saying that I'm saying investing into mining is gambling. It's not. But I think that obviously, especially when it comes to investing into juniors, Rob, there's a little bit more risk reward. And I think that in the investor based in Hong Kong, they're much more attuned to that risk. Just in the same way that if I go to Vancouver or if I go to Perth, I can find it in the investor psyche that they're more likely to be attracted toward junior mining stocks. I see that in Hong Kong. In Singapore, not so much.
Yeah, understand. And from the research and discussions you're having across obviously the market, the different people that you're speaking to, which commodities are attracting the most attention and investment this year, and why?
Yeah, so I'm going to go for two obvious ones and then maybe one not so obvious one. So the two obvious ones are gold and copper. I think that, certainly in my conversations and talking to my colleagues who are at PDAC this year, that copper seemed to be the commodity that was on like everyone's sort of like lips. So we're certainly seeing sort of like stronger interest from copper miners in terms of coming on to not just resourcing tomorrow, but also IMARC as well. I'd also add in gold into the conversation as well. I know there was a bit of a pullback, obviously, once there was the Iran sort of like invasion and war sort of like kind of took place. But most investors I speak to think that gold's only going to go one way this year. It will be 5,000, 5,500 by the sort of like year end. And again, even then next year, it's going to go and carry on sort of going up. So those are the two obvious commodities to go and talk about. The third one that I might throw in the mix, which not everyone agrees with me on, but I feel I'm seeing a little bit more interest in terms of iron ore and maybe more like high grade iron ore. So, I think there's an argument to be said, and I think some countries do. They do see iron ore as sort of like a critical mineral, but often as event organisers, it often gets a bit left off the conversation. It probably gets discussed at steel events for very obvious reasons, but I think that I'm seeing a little bit more of an interest in my research this year. And I'm going to go and cheat now. I'm adding like a fourth category as well, but I think just because of what we've talked about with regards to resilience and supply chain security, just an increased sort of interest in that whole batch of critical minerals used for like defense applications. So, we're seeing a lot of like interest there, whether it's the work that Project Volt are doing, whether it's in terms of building like rare earth, sort of like downstream, sort of like processing. But there seems to be a lot of like, interest within that area, which we're trying to develop it and sort of develop themes on our agendas.
Bit more of a personal question. Do you sort of personally invest in mining equities? And if so, how has your approach to mine investment evolved over time and obviously since you came into the industry?
Yeah. So the older I've become, Rob, the more boring I've become, basically, is a short answer to that question. When I first joined Resourcing Tomorrow, I probably invested a lot more into junior mining stocks than I do now. I found that I had a number of sort of challenges with that. I guess the first and obvious one is I'm absolutely brilliant at buying mining stocks. I'm absolutely hopeless at selling them. And I'm sure that, many of your listeners have done that. They think, oh, that's gone down by 20%. Maybe it will bounce back sort of next week. And it never, ever does. So I found that I didn't quite have that sort of like discipline to kind of like go with my sort of convictions. And then I was talking to the very well-known investor, entrepreneur, Rick Rule, and then he taught me a very good sort of investment lesson. He said, the amount of stocks you should own should go and sort of like equate to how many hours a month you're prepared to spend following the stock. So if you own 15 stocks, you should spend 15 hours a month going and re-researching those stocks. Is it still correct to go and hold them, or should I go and hold now? And once I sort of like listened to his advice, I dramatically pared down my sort of like investments into mining. So I hold a couple of the sort of like VanEck sort of like, kind of like gold mining funds and one of the BlackRock ones now. But I'm a much more kind of conservative than I like used to be. But I think it's partly of two things. One is discipline. I know I don't have the discipline. And I think secondly, a little bit sort of like time. But, maybe when it gets to my retirement, I may become a little bit more sort of like open to sort of like, I wouldn't say like open to risk. I think if you're going to invest into junior mining, you've got to commit a certain amount of time. And I think at the moment, I just don't have that time to commit in order to do myself justice.
Yeah. Obviously, we spoke about commodity picks. Is there particular jurisdictions that you sort of favour at the moment, and whether that's countries or even continents? Is there a theme around where you may be looking to invest more so in particular jurisdictions rather than some others?
So, short answer is no. But it's kind of been interesting. This often comes up in a debate at our mining events, to what extent you should be looking at the asset and what extent should you be looking at the sort of like management. Um, Obviously, the answer to it is like ideally both. You have like a great asset in a great tier one jurisdiction, and you have a great sort of like management team. But very rarely do the stars align and you have like a great management team, a great asset, and it's in a tier one jurisdiction. You always have to sort of trade off those sort of like balances. I think for me, when I have traded off those balances in the past, I've tended to have gone with like good management teams, because I think to me, one of the sort of like life lessons is that, and it probably comes in the conference industry, is I've seen many really great conferences fail due to poor execution. And I've seen many average conferences succeed due to great execution. So to me, when I apply that to mining investment, I think if you've got a great management team, then they may be very good at sort of like, executing the assets, probably sort of like selling it, finding a buyer where a poor management team wouldn't have found it. Maybe sort of like, maybe sort of better interpretation of like drilling results because I've got a better management team. So I tend to say if I had to gun to my head, which is the most important of the three, I'm going to say it's always I always go with the management team, but I fully respect you could probably find other people who would heartily disagree with me.
No, and I think I agree with you with that along those lines as well. I think the management team is important, although obviously the resource needs to be sufficient to
Sure.
make it work. So, and lastly, just wonder what the outlook is for the next sort of 12 months for yourself and for Beacon Events, and obviously all the different conferences that you've got coming up.
Yeah, so at Beacon Events, we do have like a number of events which we're thinking about launching. We tend to be kind of quite cautious in terms of our like launches. Is that I make no secret to our business strategy is that with our 4 events, if let's say we could grow our events by 25% revenue this year, then next year, and then the year after, by the law of compound averages, that means our events double in size every sort of like 3 years. So we're quite happy to sort of like take that quite conservative approach. And to be honest, people very rarely say to me in a research call, Rob, what the world needs right now is more mining conferences. So in my previous job, you're going to find this quite surprising. I used to organize oil and gas training courses. We did 365 oil and gas training courses in the course of
One
one
a
year.
day.
And it was one a day. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that business model. So, I know that there's people out there who do that business model. It works very, very well. But for us, it's a case of let's focus on doing the event that's the best in class in Australia, IMAR, the best in class in Asia. It's a Hong Kong event. Likewise with Future Minerals Forum in the Middle East, and likewise with Resourcing Tomorrow in London, and leave the likes of PDAC to probably be the best North American event, in Indaba for South Africa. So when we do launches, we really kind of like think them over. Obviously, there's always challenges to the business. I mean, obviously, with things that are going on in the Middle East at the moment. There's always a bit of uncertainty about what's going to happen there. But even then, I have to say, when I'm talking to people about Future Minerals Forum, they'll often say to me, two sentences that are slightly contradictory. They'll say, "Oh, I'm not too sure whether people will go to Future Minerals Forum next year." And I go, "But so will you go?" And they go, "Yeah, but I'm planning to go." So I think actually, Riyadh is actually still very, very sort of safe place. And I think I've seen actually a lot of our clients have been to Riyadh quite a few times sort of this year. So even in an event like that, I'm actually very, very bullish about it. And again, we're talking to each other in May. And I think, just I was just looking at the news and airways just before he came along. I think that the situation will have significantly improved over, by the end of the summer. And by the time it gets to November and December, things will be, people will be kind of desperate to go to Future Minerals Forum. So really looking forward to a successful event there. But back to your question is, we're quite conservative. We probably, we maybe tend to launch an event every kind of couple of years, but we're quite happy just to grow our existing portfolio.
Yeah, great. Andrew, really appreciate your time. Thank you for obviously sharing your story. Thank you for sharing Beacon events and all the different conferences that you put on. As an attendee to a few of them, highly recommend them. Definitely for obviously the content that is given out at these conferences, either by mining executives and also obviously governments as well. So I do highly recommend attending one of those events, whether you're a company or even whether you're an investor and want to obviously gain some insight and some additional knowledge that you can't, as you said, that you can't get from Google or ChatGPT. Yeah. So really appreciate your time. If our audience obviously wants to follow yourself, follow obviously Beacon events, and obviously get notified of all the upcoming events, how can they go about doing that, and what social media platform channels do you go on?
Yeah. So the Resourcing Tomorrow one is www.resourcingtomorrow.com. iMark is imarkglobal.com, and Future Minerals Forum is futuremineralsforum.com. So if you go into any of those sort of websites, or you can just kind of drop me a message on LinkedIn. Love to go and sort of talk to you, and would really be happy to have a conversation with you about any of our events.
Yes, certainly. I'll include those all in the show notes accompanying this episode for easy access. So I wish you well for all the upcoming events going into the end of the year and beginning next year. And no doubt I will see you at one of the events, and no doubt some of our audience will be seeing you as well. So wish you well for the rest of the year.
Thank you very much for your time, Rob.
No worries. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed that episode. Thank you for listening. As always, appreciate your continued support. Please keep sharing these episodes far and wide. This particular episode should appeal to many, many of you listeners and many people that you know within the industry. If they haven't been to a conference before, maybe they should look at one of the Beacon events, as Andrew alluded to, the 4 events that they hold throughout the year, throughout different regions around the world. So appreciate if you can keep sharing these episodes far and wide. And until next time, happy mining.